Even if you were not born in 1969, you must have heard about Neil Armstrong's giant leap for mankind, the first man to ever land on the moon. That's if he ever truly went to the moon. He said a lot when he was alive.
We were focused on progress and
Yes.
making those incremental steps. We're looking for success in those steps.
But before his death, Neil Armstrong revealed a terrifying secret. A cryptic message that makes it difficult to believe all we have been told about the moon. One of those particularly interested in the moon landing is Joe Rogan, and he has finally revealed the secret of Neil Armstrong's moon landing in his podcast, Neil Armstrong to the Moon and Back. Neil Armstrong was born on August 5, 1930 near Wapakoneta, Ohio. He was a boy who took an interest in flying from a very tender age, and everything he did was in that path. By the time he was ready for university, he chose to study aeronautical engineering at Purdue University. At the time, the U.S. Navy was paying his tuition under the Holloway Plan. By age 19, he had already become a midshipman and a naval aviator the following year. He saw action in the Korean War, flying the Grumman F-9F Panther from the aircraft carrier USS Essex. After the war, he completed his bachelor's degree at Purdue and became a test pilot at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, high-speed flight station at Edwards Air Force Base in California. He was the project pilot on Century Series fighters and flew the North American X-15 7 times. He was also a participant in the U.S. Air Force's Man in Space Soonest and X-20 Dinosaur human spaceflight programs. In 1962, Armstrong joined the NASA Astronaut Corps in the second group. He made his first spaceflight as command pilot of Gemini 8 in March 1966, becoming NASA's first civilian astronaut to fly in space. During this mission with pilot David Scott, he performed the first docking of 2 spacecraft. The mission was aborted after Armstrong used some of his re-entry control fuel to stabilize a dangerous roll caused by a stuck thruster. During training for Armstrong's second and last spaceflight as commander of Apollo 11, he had to eject from the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle moments before a crash. Fast forward to July 20, 1969, when Armstrong became the first man to land on the moon. Immediately he stepped on the moon, he said, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." It was broadcast live to an estimated 530 million viewers worldwide. It was a great day, and the victory was a major one for the U.S. in the space race. Together with the other astronauts, Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Richard Nixon and received the 1969 Collier Trophy. Also, in 1978, President Jimmy Carter presented him with the Congressional Space Medal of Honor, and he was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame in 1979. That's not all. In 2009, Armstrong received the Congressional Gold Medal together with other crewmates. Even after he retired from NASA in 1971, Armstrong didn't leave his path. He taught in the Department of Aerospace Engineering at the University of Cincinnati until 1979. He also served on the Apollo 13 accident investigation and on the Rogers Commission, which investigated the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. You can agree that Armstrong lived a life of impact, and even though the world doesn't love to lose men like him, we had no choice but to say goodbye to him in 2012 when he died from coronary bypass surgery at the age of 82. But before his death, he left a cryptic message.
To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone.
That message was shared in 1994, and no matter how many times you look at it, you just don't seem to get what he was talking about. Now imagine if someone like Joe Rogan, who believes that the Earth is flat, got to see that. Well, he saw it, and just couldn't make sense of it either. While Joe Rogan can go on and on about his theories trying to prove that the moon landing was a hoax, there are so many conspiracy theories out there. These theories will leave you who have believed in the moon landing for years, questioning what you have learned. But do you even blame anyone? The moon is one weird satellite that sometimes looks full, sometimes comes in half, and sometimes is like a slice of something yummy. And the craziest part? It's so far away. talking about 3,084,400 kilometers away? That said, it's unsurprising that the moon would generate so many myths and conspiracy theories. For centuries, people have posited such batty ideas as the moon is made of cheese, or that women's menstrual cycles are affected by the lunar cycle. Wait, do you even believe that? Well, moving on, you would think the 1969 moon landing would have solved the problem of the moon is this or that, but no, if anything, it only worsened the case. The moon landing ramped up the speculation and increased the number of Americans who believed it was a hoax around 1970s to about 38%. Yep, it is that serious. Well, what about the video evidence, right? Oh yeah, we saw Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon, and this third guy that didn't land with them but only orbited to get involved in a way. But you see, people have come up with a wide range of explanations for the iconic footage of Armstrong walking on the moon, some of which involve director Stanley Kubrick and a 1970s thriller starring O.J. Simpson as an astronaut. That's crazy, right? We're just getting started. One curious question, though. What started the moon landing conspiracy theories? According to sources, the chief figure behind lunar landing hoax conspiracy theories was a man named William Casing, a former technical writer who briefly worked at a company that made rocket engines. After the first lunar landing in 1969, Casing called bullshit, claiming that the United States simply hadn't yet developed the technology for such a mission. He then waited for 7 good years, 1976, to self-publish a book called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle. As you must have guessed, what the book argued was that the government faked the moon landing and shot it at a studio in Area 51, basically as a way to stick it to the Soviets. The primary basis for his argument was that stars were not visible in the photos of the Apollo 11 landing. When you think about it, that makes sense, but it has been debunked by noon landing debunkers saying that the camera's aperture was not wide enough to capture the light from the stars. This book gained a fair amount of cultural prominence, to the degree that it became something of the eat, pray, love for the conspiracy theorist set. In the wake of Watergate, the Vietnam War, and the release of the details of the MK-Ultra CIA mind control project, the public was well primed to be skeptical of the US government, creating the ideal circumstances for Casing's ideas to take hold and gain traction. According to one 1976 Gallup poll, close to 30% of Americans thought the moon landing was faked, a sizable number, especially when you consider that according to a recent poll, only about 5% of Americans believe that vaccines cause autism, an arguably much more prevalent, though equally inaccurate conspiracy theory than the idea that the moon landing was a hoax. Unfortunately, the propagation of Casing's theories didn't stop with the publication of his book. The 1978 release of a film called Capricorn 1, which told the story of a journalist who uncovers a government hoax about astronauts landing on Mars, did much to promote the idea that the moon landing was staged. It didn't matter that the film was fictional, nor that it was poorly reviewed, nor that O.J. Simpson played one of the astronauts. The film had the effect of propagating Casing's theories, to the degree that footage from Capricorn 1 continues to be used in documentaries, suggesting that the moon landing was a hoax. Back in 2002, the moon landing conspiracy theory community came face to face with those behind the moon landing themselves, and it did not go well. Bart Sibrel, a prominent moon landing conspiracy theorist, approached Buzz Aldrin outside a Beverly Hills hotel, accusing him of being a liar and a coward. Aldrin promptly punched Sibrel in the face. Although getting punched in the face by an American hero would have been enough to make anyone think twice about their life choices, it did nothing to sway Sibrel, who still insists that the moon landing was faked. With this, shall we open the doors to explore more moon landing conspiracy theories? Let's start with the conspiracies surrounding the pictures. One of the theories states that in some of the photos, the crosshairs appear to be behind objects. What the experts think is that the cameras were fitted with a Riceau plate, which is a clear glass plate with a reticle etched on, making it impossible for any photographed object to appear in front of the grid. Conspiracists often use this evidence to suggest that objects were pasted over the photographs and hence obscure the reticle. This effect only appears in copied and scanned photos, not any originals. It is caused by overexposure. The bright white areas of the emulsion bleed over the thin black crosshairs. The crosshairs are only about 0.004 inches thick, and emulsion would only have to bleed about half that much to fully obscure it. Furthermore, there are many photos where the middle of the crosshair is washed out, but the rest is intact. In some photos of the American flag, parts of one crosshair appear on the red stripes, but parts of the same crosshair are faded or invisible on the white stripes. There would have been no reason to paste white stripes onto the flag. Still on photos, have you ever seen stars in any of the photos? Conspiracy theorists have claimed that there are no stars in any of the photos. The Apollo 11 astronauts also stated in post-mission press conferences that they did not remember seeing any stars during extravehicular activity. Conspiracists contend that NASA chose not to put the stars into the photos because astronomers would have been able to use them to determine whether the photos were taken from the Earth or the Moon by means of identifying them and comparing their celestial position and parallax to what would be expected for either observation site. Another is that the angle and color of shadows are inconsistent, which suggests that artificial lights were used. Shadows on the Moon are complicated by reflected light, uneven ground, wide-angle lens distortion, and lunar dust. It is believed that there are several light sources: the sun, sunlight reflected from the Earth, sunlight reflected from the Moon's surface, and sunlight reflected from the astronauts and the lunar module. Light from these sources is scattered by lunar dust in many directions, including into shadows. Shadows falling into craters and hills may appear longer, shorter, and distorted. Furthermore, shadows display the properties of vanishing point perspective, leading them to converge to a point on the horizon. Also, it is said that there are identical backgrounds in photos which, according to their captions, were taken miles apart. This suggests that a painted background was used. As explained by experts, backgrounds were not identical, just similar. What appears as nearby hills in some photos are actually mountains many miles away. On Earth, objects that are further away will appear fainter and less detailed. On the Moon, there is no atmosphere or haze to obscure faraway objects, thus they appear clearer and nearer. Furthermore, there are very few objects such as trees to help judge distance. The number of pictures taken also made conspiracy theorists say the number of photos taken is implausibly high, up to 1 photo per 50 seconds. A better explanation may be that simplified gear with fixed settings allowed 2 photos a second. Many were taken immediately after each other as stereo pairs or panorama sequences. The calculation 1 per 50 seconds was based on a lone astronaut on the surface and does not take into account that 2 astronauts were sharing the workload and simultaneously taking photographs during an extravehicular activity. It has also been observed that the photos contain artifacts like the 2 seemingly matching C's on a rock and the ground. To conspiracy theorists, they may be labeled studio props. Debunkers have claimed that the C-shaped objects are most likely printing imperfections and do not appear in the original film from the camera. It has been suggested that the C could be a coiled hair. One of the craziest theories is that of a resident of Perth, Western Australia, a woman named Una Ronald. She said that for 2 or 3 seconds, she saw a Coca-Cola bottle roll across the lower right quadrant of her television screen that was displaying the live broadcast of the Apollo 11 EVA. She also said that several letters appeared in the West Australian discussing the Coca-Cola bottle incident within 10 days of the lunar landing. The truth is, no such newspaper reports or recordings have been found, and Ronald's claims have only been relayed by one source. There are also flaws in the story. For example, the statement that she had to stay up late to watch the moon landing live is easily discounted by many witnesses in Australia who watched the landing in the middle of their daytime. That was easily debunked, but this theory about footprint is a big one. It is observed that footprints in the moon dust are unexpectedly well preserved, despite the lack of moisture. Well, experts have said that moon dust has not been weathered like Earth sand and has sharp edges. This allows the dust particles to stick together and hold their shape in the vacuum. When the astronauts were asked about the moon dust, they likened it to talcum powder or wet sand, which kind of explains why the footprint is well preserved. But what about the very hot moon's surface that refused to melt the camera film? Well, we have never been to the moon, but researchers have said that there is no atmosphere to efficiently bind lunar surface heat to devices such as cameras that are not in direct contact with it. In a vacuum, only radiation remains as a heat transfer mechanism. The physics of radiative heat transfer is thoroughly understood, and the proper use of passive optical coatings and paints was enough to control the temperature of the film within the cameras. Lunar module temperatures were controlled with similar coatings that gave them a gold color. Also, while the moon's surface does get very hot at lunar noon, every Apollo landing was made shortly after lunar sunrise at the landing site. The moon's day is about 29.5 Earth days long, meaning that one moon day lasts nearly 15 Earth days. During the longer stays, the astronauts did notice increased cooling loads on their spacesuits as the sun and surface temperature continued to rise, but the effect was easily countered by the passive and active cooling systems. The film was not in direct sunlight, so it was not overheated. Oh yeah, about the footprints making a mark on the moon, many have wondered why the lunar module weighed 17 tons and made no mark on the moon dust, while footprints can be seen. The explanation? On the surface of the Earth, Apollo 11's fueled and crewed lunar module Eagle would have weighed approximately 17 short tons. But on the surface of the moon, after expending fuel and oxidizer on its descent from lunar orbit, the lander weighed about 1,200 kilograms. The astronauts were much lighter than the lander, but their boots were much smaller than the lander's approximately 91 centimeters cm foot pads. Pressure rather than mass determines the amount of regolith compression. In some photos, the foot pads did press into the regolith, especially when they moved sideways at touchdown. The bearing pressure under Apollo 11's foot pads, with the lander being about 44 times the weight of an EVA-configured astronaut, would have been of similar magnitude to the bearing pressure exerted by the astronauts' boots. Now, to the most discussed conspiracy theory, the flapping flag. This conspiracy theory decrying NASA's achievement claims the US flag flapping around in the vacuum of space is evidence of the moon landing being a hoax. When Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted the American flag, the red and white fabric appeared to move as if it were in the wind. The question remains, if there is no atmosphere on the moon, how could the flag wave around like that? Or is it true that the moon landing was filmed in the middle of nowhere in the deserts of Nevada, US? Most likely not, as there is one key factor all lunar conspiracies get wrong, and that is the American flag did not really flap or wave on the moon. According to the UK National Space Centre in Leicester, the flag's apparent movements were caused by the astronauts themselves and not wind. In video footage of the flag being planted into the moon's surface, it also appears to wave back and forth. This is because when astronauts were planting it, they rotated it back and forth to better dig into the lunar soil, which of course made the flag ripple like a pendulum, without a breeze. There's a huge amount of footage of the flag standing on the moon in the same position. By simply comparing photos of the moon snapped after the flag was planted, you will see the astronauts moving around, but the flag remains in the same position. The US flag on the moon was designed in a way that would keep it standing straight in the airless environment of the moon. According to NASA, the flag would otherwise disappointingly hang limp. This next conspiracy theory may be the scariest and saddest of all, and it's about the deaths of NASA personnel. In a televised program about the moon landing hoax allegations, Fox Entertainment Group listed the deaths of 10 astronauts and 2 civilians related to the crewed spaceflight program as part of an alleged cover-up. Starting from Theodore Freeman, who was killed ejecting from a T-38, which had suffered a bird strike in October 1964. Elliot C. and Charlie Bassett, who both died in the T-38 crash due to bad weather in February 1966. Virgil Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee were all killed in a fire during the Plugs Out test preceding Apollo 1 in January 1967. Edward Givens was killed in a car accident in June 1967. Clifton Williams was killed after ejecting from a T-38 on October 1967. Michael J. Adams died in an X-15 crash in November 1967. Adams was the only pilot killed during the X-15 flight test program. He was a test pilot, not a NASA astronaut, but had flown the X-15 above 80 kilometers or 50 miles. Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. was killed in an F-104 crash in December 1967, shortly after being selected as a pilot with the United States Air Force's Manned Orbiting Laboratory program, which was canceled in 1969. Thomas Ronald Barron died in an automobile collision with a train on April 27, 1967, 6 days after testifying before Reverend Olin E. Teague's House Subcommittee on NASA Oversight hearings held following the Apollo 1 fire, after which he was fired. Both Mike Adams and pilot Robert Lawrence had no connection with the civilian crewed space program that oversaw the Apollo missions. Barron was a quality control inspector who wrote a report critical of the Apollo program and was an outspoken critic of NASA's safety record after the Apollo 1 fire. Barron and his family were killed as their car was struck by a train at a train crossing. The deaths were recorded as an accident. All of these deaths occurred at least 20 months before Apollo 11 and subsequent flights. And as of January 2024, 4 of the 12 Apollo astronauts who landed on the moon between 1969 and 1972 are still alive, including Buzz Aldrin. Also, 4 of the 12 Apollo astronauts who flew to the moon without landing between 1968 and 1972 are still alive. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. There are several conspiracy theories about the moon landing, some of which sound really convincing. But did they really lie to us in 1969? After Joe Rogan claimed that before his death, Neil Armstrong revealed a terrifying secret that has shown that there may be secrets we truly do not know about the moon landing. We have been left with so many unanswered questions about the moon. As conspiracy theorists delve into all that surrounds the moon landing, more secrets are revealed. And if you think you have seen it all, then you should hear about Postflight Conference of 1969. Perhaps the most confusing and disturbing of all is the Postflight Conference, which Joe Rogan pointed out in one of his podcasts. First, let's see a clip of the video. It's actually weird that these astronauts were looking like they were forced to do the conference or like they were hiding something. During the post-flight conference for Apollo 11, there were moments in which the astronauts appeared serious or tired in a press conference, otherwise filled with laughter. Conspiracy theorists often present images of those moments and portray it as the astronauts feeling guilty about faking the landing. This supposed evidence can be explained as a case of cherry-picking and an appeal to emotion. Here's what Joe Rogan had to say about the conference. Well, what do you think about this particular conspiracy theory without talking about what the debunkers had to say? How did Stanley Kubrick get involved in all of these? While the source of the claim is a bit unclear, many moon landing deniers have suggested that Stanley Kubrick directed the footage for the staged moon landing, after being approached by NASA based on his work in the 1968 movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. One source claims that Kubrick initially declined the offer, only relenting when NASA threatened to put his little brother as a member of the Communist Party, though this would have been in the late 1960s, nearly a full decade after the height of the Red Scare. The story goes that Kubrick spent 18 months on a soundstage shooting the footage for the Apollo 11 and 12 moon missions, and that his 1980 film, The Shining, serves as a sort of apology for having snookered the American public. Because Kubrick has been dead for about 2 decades, he was not available at press time to comment on this theory. His daughter Vivian, however, has publicly denied it, saying in a 2016 Facebook post that the idea that her father helped the US government stage a moon landing is manifestly a grotesque lie. All we can really say is that, if Kubrick did indeed have the technical skill to fake the moon landing, then Eyes Wide Shut should have been an infinitely less boring movie. One more question, though. Do people still believe in moon landing-related conspiracy theories? Although some people still believe in it, moon landing conspiracy theories aren't nearly as popular as they used to be anymore. Recent opinion polls suggest that between 5 to 6% of Americans currently believe the moon landing was staged, a far cry from the nearly 30% in the 1970s. But given the increased level of skepticism toward mainstream media narrative, coupled with the rapid spread of fake news on giant social media platforms, it's not surprising that lunar landing conspiracy theories have found a home on YouTube. Shane Dawson, for instance, a hugely popular vlogger with more than 22 million subscribers, has a video in which he promotes the idea that the moon landing was faked by the government. While he doesn't explicitly say he believes NASA faked the moon landing, he does say that it would not be a shock, because the government fakes so many things. There's been discussion about the 9/11 incident. He believes the moon landing can also be fake. He believes the government can do that just to win over other countries. His video, however, has been profitable for him, earning him around $3,500 and $28,000 based on ad revenue. Although YouTube has vowed to curb the spread of content promoting conspiracy theories by, among other things, demonetizing such videos, and including a link to a summary of the Apollo space program atop such videos, it's clear that stirring people's skepticism about things they don't quite understand, up to and including the moon, is still big business. For this reason, it's unlikely that moon landing conspiracy theories, or any other type of conspiracy theories really, will go away anytime soon. After all that has been discussed, what do you think? Did Armstrong and Aldrin land on the moon, or was it a hoax? Let us know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.